This is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I'm here today with a book tag. And this is exciting because I've been wanting to do more of these, and this is the first one that I've done since my newbie tag back in early spring. So I'm excited to be doing this. This one is called the Deja Vu Reread book tag, and it was started by Walker Writes 7. So I'll link to it down below and include the questions so that you can join in the fun too. This appealed to me because I don't do a lot of rereads, but when I do, I tend to really enjoy them. So let's dive in. Okay, question 1. Do you reread and how often? Oh, I guess I already answered that, but sometimes I do, not as often as I usually intend to. And one reason for this change of scenery today from from the other bookcase I usually record in front of is that this is our keeper bookcase. These are the books that my husband and I have really loved, want to hang on to, the ones that we don't, give away to charity or pass along. So theoretically, this entire bookshelf, which has 4 shelves on it, and as you can see, quite a few stacked up top because we're running out of space. Theoretically, these could all be rereads, but in reality, there are always so many newer books that I haven't read yet, or even classics that I haven't read yet, that I don't typically do a lot of rereading. Okay, so question 2, why do you or don't you reread? Well, I just answered part of that, just time and the number of books that are available. But I do tend to reread 2 different kinds of books. One are classics, typically books that I read a very long time ago, often in high school or college, that I remember enjoying, but I don't really remember an awful lot about them. So I have fun rereading classics like that. The other kind of book that I tend to reread are books that were just my absolute favorites. The books that are on my top 10 list of all times, the ones that I just love, those I do tend to reread. And fortunately, many of my favorite books have just happened to come up in one of my book groups as a selection, and that gives me an opportunity to reread it. Question 3, what have been your favorite books to reread? Well, my all-time favorite books have also been my favorite ones to reread. And like I said, sometimes these have come up in book groups and I've reread them for that reason. Sometimes I've just reread them on my own. So a few of my all-time favorites that are also my favorite rereads: Hum If You Don't Know the Words by Bianca Marais. If you have not read this book yet, or maybe even heard of it, you absolutely must read it. I loved it. Both times that I read it. It's set in South Africa during apartheid. It's about a young girl who loses her parents in a horrible act of violence right at the beginning. And about the intersection of her life, she's a white girl brought up in a fairly wealthy suburb, and how her life crosses with the Black woman that is hired to take care of her when she goes to live with her aunt who works. So it's historical fiction, it's a drama, there are elements of suspense and thriller in it, because the Black woman has come to the city to look for her own daughter who's missing. And it's very, very funny. So if you haven't read that yet, I highly recommend it. One of my favorite rereads, Hum If You Don't Know the Words. I have also reread twice The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver, which I'm sure everyone has heard of. And again, I read it the first time on my own and then read it a second time when a book group chose it, and it was just as good the second time through. Another of my all-time favorites, this is one of my hug it to your chest when you finish reading it books, The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger. I love this book. It makes me cry, even though I have already read it and I know it's going to happen. It still makes me cry. It's touching, it's warm, it's moving. Just really love it. And I really enjoyed The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin. And I enjoyed this on my own, and then again, a book group chose it for their selection. So I reread it and enjoyed it again. As far as classics go and rereads, I read Jane Eyre in high school, and I remembered that I liked it, but really didn't remember anything else about it. And I just reread it last summer as part of Big Book Summer, and I really loved it. So it really stood the test of time. The other books that I have reread, the classics that I have reread that I originally read in high school, we read a lot of Dickens in high school, and I remembered enjoying it. Things like A Tale of Two Cities. We read Great Expectations in 9th grade, so a very long time ago for me. And I remembered I always enjoyed Dickens. So a couple of summers ago, again for Big Book Summer, I listened to Great Expectations on audio, which was a reread for me, and I absolutely loved it. I laughed out loud, really, really enjoyed it. So those have really stood the test of time. Question 3.5. What would you like to reread? Well, the same categories. Like I said, I do enjoy rereading some of the classics I read a long time ago. So some of the ones I haven't gotten to yet include 1984. I think that was 9th or 10th grade, and I loved it. My friend and I did this big project recreating the city. So that really stuck in my head, but it's been decades since I read it. Also Animal Farm, also by George Orwell. There are other Dickens novels I'd like to reread. Oh, and I absolutely loved Ray Bradbury when I was a teenager. I read every single one of his books in our public library, just made my way through the whole collection. I've reread a couple of them in recent years. Fahrenheit 451, trying to think The Martian Chronicles a couple of years ago. I've really enjoyed those, so I want to keep rereading some of those Ray Bradbury books that I remember loving so much as a teenager. And of course, my favorites. Anything off this shelf, I'm sure at one point I will probably try to reread. Question 4. What book do you predict will be so good that you will want to reread it? This is a tough question because it's asking me to make a judgment on a book I haven't read yet. So I guess I would say newer books from some of my favorite authors, like Barbara Kingsolver, Amor Towles. I'm very interested to read his latest book and may want to reread that. This spring I read A Gentleman in Moscow and loved it, one of my top books of the year. John Boyne is another author. I've read a couple of his books that I really loved, so I'd be interested in anything new he's got coming out. So, anything new by favorite authors is likely to be a winner for me. Question 5, pick a book from your younger years that you think would be interesting to reread. Well, I do this a lot. Along with the classics, I include some of my childhood favorites. I've reread like The Secret Garden. I think I've reread Pippi Longstocking. Certainly A Wrinkle in Time, which was my all-time favorite book in elementary school. But one that I have not yet reread is kind of a little-known book called Katie John by Mary Calhoun. And this book just really made an impression on me. I probably read it in like later elementary school years, and I just remember absolutely loving it. So I would definitely like to pick that up again and reread it and, remind myself of why I loved it so much in the first place. Question 6. Tell us a series or a book that's so big and complex you need to reread to better understand. Okay, this isn't something I do very often. I don't read many series. My son does this all the time. He loves epic fantasies. The bigger the better, the longer the series, the better. He's read all of the Wheel of Time books. He's got favorite authors and he loves plowing through these big series. And if there's a new book out in one of his favorite series, he will go back and reread the entire series, often consisting of 1,000-page books, before he reads the new one. So he does that. I don't do it that often. I guess I could see myself maybe rereading some of Dickens' novels that I really enjoyed. They're not hard to understand, but they do tend to be long and complex, so they would probably benefit from a rereading. Question 7, is there a specific type of genre you think is best or worst for reread potential? Well, I think the books that are best for rereads is the ones that make you feel, the ones that make you laugh out loud or cry. I think those work really well for rereads because it's not the plot that's as important as how it makes you feel. So certainly many of my favorite rereads fall into that category. The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, The Time Traveler's Wife. I've read it twice, and even though I knew what was going to happen in the plot, I was sobbing my eyes out just as hard the second time. So, I really love books like that that make you feel something. Earlier this year, I read The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. That was much the same way, made me cry, made me laugh. So I can see rereading that at some point. The books that are worst for rereading are probably mystery thrillers because you already know how it ends. You know who did it. You know that the bad guy gets caught or whatever. Although, a caveat, if it's been a while, I probably won't remember the ending. So I could probably even reread some mysteries and thrillers and not know the difference. Question 8, is there a book you've liked more upon reread? So, of course, there's always a fear when you reread a favorite book that it won't live up to that first experience. And sometimes that's true, if you read it at a particular time in your life when you needed it. But in my experience, all of my favorite rereads have lived up to my expectations and have been just as good, if not better, the second time. Now, there is one in particular, Replay by Ken Grimwood. Again, this is kind of a little known book. It's science fiction. It's about a man who keeps replaying part of his life. So, he's like in his 40s, in an unhappy marriage, and all of a sudden he wakes up and he's an 18-year-old in his college dorm room again. And this happens several times to him. He has no control over it. I find this book endlessly thought-provoking. I mean, it just really makes you think, what if you were replaying your life? What would you do differently? What would you try to mimic exactly so that it would turn out the same? It's just really fascinating. So far, I have read Replay 3 times. It just seems like it gets better every time because it just makes you think. So I will definitely reread this again. I think it also, when you read a book at a different point in your life, then I think it can have a different effect on you and make you think different things. Question 8.5, is there a book you liked less upon reread? And I thought about this for a while, but I really couldn't think of one. I would say, I wouldn't reread a book unless I really loved it the first time. So I haven't had that happen. Question 9, if you do reread, let us know about a book you'd like to reread before the end of this year. Wow, okay, the end of this year is too tight a deadline. I've already got my reading planned out. I like to do the RIP challenge in the fall, and I've got loads of mysteries and thrillers and ghost stories and all kinds of things I want to read then. I like to read nonfiction for Nonfiction November. And again, I've already got a stack that I want to read for then. So I don't know if I can fit in a reread before the end of the year. Who knows what one of my book clubs may choose. But if I'm thinking about maybe a book I will definitely reread, one that comes to mind is The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. The Sparrow was my best novel read in 2018. I really loved it. I had heard great things about it, and it lived up to expectations. And there is a sequel to it that I haven't gotten to yet. So I could definitely see myself rereading The Sparrow before I read the sequel. Maybe a good idea for my Christmas list. And finally, question 10 is tag your friends. So there are a few booktubers that I would love to hear their answers to these questions. I am tagging Linda Booklady, Red Dot Reads, Nat Joe's Caffeinated Library, and Karen Evans. They are all booktubers that I really enjoy, and I encourage you to check out their channels. I'll put the links down below. So that's my reread Deja Vu book tag. This was a lot of fun. I hope to do more book tags in the future. And I hope you'll join me on this one. Whether I tagged you or not, please visit the link down below to the original video and the questions and join the fun.